So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Commission on Aging's meeting, our monthly meeting. My name is Jody Timms, and I chair the Planning Committee for the Commission. Hi. And yes, I'm really glad you're all here. There's lots of places we could be this morning, but this is the right place for you. So we have a wonderful speaker and, well, a wonderful morning planned for you for the next hour. First, I want to give you a little bit of information about Marin and about the subject. So in our last needs assessment that the Commission on Aging did, where we had 3,000 folks who responded, we asked them about their top concerns. There were 18 different choices people could choose in that process, and in the top 6 was the concern about being isolated or depressed. It was in our top 6, hence the choice for this subject matter today. 40% of all the respondents to that survey listed a concern about being isolated or being depressed. So nearly half. The census in Marin does identify 44,000 households with older adults, and of those, 44% of those households are a senior living alone. So that's a large number. 44% of the 44,000 households are headed by single people, or single people are living alone. And as we know, living alone can be associated with a whole number of things. Our speaker is going to tell us a lot about that today, as well as helping us to define isolation and loneliness, etc. But that sense of being disconnected from the larger community is a common concern. Poor health can sometimes be a result. Dietary practices, when you're only cooking for one, can sometimes suffer. So we'll be hearing more about all of that, and the AAA does in fact fund programs that help in Marin County to folks to address isolation, including the congregate meals, where older adults can come together. And in Marin, I think we're still at almost every day there's a place you can go, 5 days a week. There's a congregate meal that you can travel to if you're able to, so that older adults can both eat and socialize together. Home-delivered meals are also a way we try to address isolation. So volunteers are delivering those meals and providing really needed social contact for some folks. And then, of course, we have visiting programs where folks can go, various volunteers go and actually meet with people. So the speakers today, we're going to hear first from Mary McCall, and she's going to do a lot of the introduction of herself. I'll just say that she is a gerontologist and a professor at Samuel Merritt University, lives in Oakland, so she came across the bridge, and she'll be doing a lot of introducing of herself. And then we're going to have Rachel Gilla from the county mental health. She's a nurse, and she's going to talk with us a little bit about the HOPE and the senior peer counseling program that we have here in the county. So she again recruits volunteers, provides training, and supervises senior peer counselors, and the group in particular in Novato. When I personally made the transition from working with younger people to working with older adults, I trained as a senior peer counselor with the county and had a client for a few years. It was a really great experience for me. So if you're thinking of a volunteer opportunity, that's a good one for sure. Rachel does outreach and engages with clients and does assessments for older adults also through HOPE and the counseling program, Senior Peer. She also provides medication services to HOPE clients, and she's been working with the county for about 12 years. She will also be we'll be hearing from an actual senior peer counselor who volunteers with the programs, and they are part of Marin's behavioral and mental health services program. So with that, and just by way of introduction to Mary, we've been communicating for a few months and just finally actually met. You know, that's the way it works in the world these days. But I did probably first meet her indirectly through a book that she co-authored Connecting Socially Isolated Seniors. This is a really great practical book. It's particularly geared for folks who work with seniors in retirement communities, which I do during the day, and I found this book really useful, ran across it at a conference, and hence, when we were looking for a speaker, tracked Mary down. So I'll let her introduce herself further, but thank you so much for coming, Mary.
Good morning. Oh, the light went off. Okay. I'm really happy to be here, and fortunately there was not much traffic coming across the bridge, so that was great. Can everyone hear me okay? Oh, hold it up a little. Oh, there. Oh, now I can. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thanks. So let me see if I can. There we go. So I'm going to give you a little bit of my background because I think it's always helpful to know who is this person who's talking to me this morning. I am an Oakland native, born and raised. I live about 7 minutes from where I grew up. Most of my family still lives there, which is quite unusual. I have 12 brothers and sisters spread across the Bay Area and Northern California, so that's unusual. And we all basically live within about 2 hours of each other, except one who exported himself to New Mexico. I come from a family of social activists. My parents were very active in the Catholic Church and the community of Oakland, so I grew up with the value of you are always doing something for someone beyond your family, and your concept of family is everybody that you meet, basically. So I don't know how else to be in the world, and I really appreciate that I got that from my parents. I have a PhD in Human Development and Aging from UC San Francisco, still local. And it was during my graduate studies that my mother's mother, who I was very close to, went from living independently to my aunt living with her to moving to a board and care, from Santa Rosa to Berkeley, close by my parents. And so here I was taking these classes on aging and then watching my own family and my grandmother, who I was very close to, go through this process. And that was really what got me into a lifetime commitment to supporting families and older people. So I work and have worked in a variety of ways beyond my kind of, quote, real job in the community, particularly with marginalized seniors. So I volunteered with Satellite Senior Homes. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. They provide federally subsidized housing for very low-income seniors in the East Bay and now beyond. It's now called Satellite Affordable Housing Associates. It merged with another organization. And that brought some of the greatest joy into my life, was working with these low-income seniors in Oakland and Berkeley and learning what their needs were and how to support them and build community. And that's actually where that book came from, was from research that was done in that low-income senior housing. I created service learning experiences for undergraduates at St. Mary's College in Moraga, where I spent 28 years. I also have to apologize. I'm getting over laryngitis that my new grandson gave me. I don't have baby immunity anymore. So my commitment has always been to getting my students into the community. That's how you really understand theory, is how does it look in practice. I have traveled to many different countries to learn about cultural values because I was raised with strong social values and values around justice, and my parents had lots of international travelers in our house growing up, so I became interested as a professional in how different cultures developed social policies to support older people, and how did cultural values underpin those social policies. And much of my work in the last 15 years has been looking at social change and demographic change in different countries around the world and saying, so in Sweden with a growing older population, in Japan with an exploding older population, how are their policies being challenged and how are their cultural and social values being pressured? So we're facing some of these same issues here. So my commitment is to whatever kind of work I can do that improves the daily lives of older people in diverse communities, where everyone can thrive in meaningful ways to them. And that means to them, not to me and what I think they might need, which we often think of as professionals. This is a lot of text, and the reason I left it here is because if anybody's interested in the PowerPoint, I wanted you to have this information, but I'll just kind of summarize it. In research that's been done, social isolation is often interchangeably used with the term loneliness, right? But those are really different terms, and you, Jody, mentioned depression as well. So I think it's important for those of us who want to know more and really work with seniors and with communities to understand the differences here. So social isolation is really a lack of social connection with people. So very few social contacts, right? Loneliness, there can be two types of loneliness. So you can have loneliness that is, I don't have enough social connection, so I'm socially isolated and I feel lonely because of that. But there's also the emotional experience of loneliness, which people can have when they have lots of social interaction. But it's not the kind of interaction that provides emotional support or emotional connection to them. And this is something that we learned in this work that we did in the low-income senior housing. So you know, or can guess, that if you're in federally subsidized housing, you're living there because that's one of your only options, right? That's the housing that's available to you. You may not be choosing to live in that building, in that neighborhood, with those people in that city, but that's your housing option. So how do we think about, okay, yes, I'm living in a building with 75 other people, but they're not people I would otherwise choose to live with. They're not otherwise people that I have other connections with or history with. So how do we create social connection even when people are living close together, but feeling socially isolated or feeling emotionally lonely, emotionally isolated? Right? Loneliness here should not be mistaken for depression either, because depression is a more, in our culture, biomedical kind of set of symptoms that we talk about, and we often deal with it biomedically. Loneliness is an emotional feeling that is not going to be dealt with Paxil or what's the other one? Prozac. Although they may be correlated, right? Some people, and we know this from research, who get depressed eventually end up socially isolated and lonely, because if you've dealt with a depressed person over a long period of time, it can be hard to continue to kind of hang out with that person and feel, you know, oh, I'm being supportive to them and it's making a difference. But lonely people, even if they may not start out depressed, may end up depressed, right? So both of those can be correlated, but they're not the same thing, and we don't always know which came first. So that's an important thing to pay attention to as well. And there are important gender differences that need to be paid attention to. So we know that older men tend to rely on their spouses as their primary source of emotional and social connection and support. So single older men may experience social isolation in a different way than women do. Older women are more likely to have social connections, but again, the question is, are those social connections working against loneliness in them? So it's important to distinguish between what kind of connections and relationships do people have quantitatively and the quality of what those are in terms of the emotional support. The research on interventions to deal with these things has been inconsistent and inconclusive. So we continually are trying to do research to figure out what is it that we can learn and what works in different situations for different groups of people. Because The contributors to social isolation and loneliness are many. So it's hard to come up with, oh, here's the thing that we should do that will work for everyone. So sensory loss is a really big one. If I can't see well, if I can't hear well, it's hard to have conversations with people. My mother, who lost her hearing early, and then it got progressively worse, felt very isolated. She lived in senior housing, and she said, I go down to the dining room, I can't hear. It's loud, I can't engage in conversations. It makes me feel more lonely to go to the dining room and eat at a table than to just have my food brought to my room. Heartbreaking. What can we do with that, right? So trying to find a place in the dining room where she might be able to have a little bit more quiet. This is something that any of you who work in the design of senior dining rooms need to take into account, right? Alcoves are much more conducive to conversation and connection than a really big open room with a really high ceiling where the noise is just bouncing around. I talked about depression. Financial resources. Maybe I don't have the money for transportation to activities. I don't have the financial resources to pay for therapy for my depression, right? One of the things I was going to talk about, Marin County specifically, is that in places, I'm talking about at the county level now, where there are wide discrepancies in income levels, it's a challenge at the community level to deal with this issue, right? I did a lot of work in Moraga, that's where St. Mary's College is, when I worked there, and for Contra Costa County Commission on Aging many years ago, looking at this issue. Very wealthy people have lots of financial resources. They can hire in-home help, but in-home help doesn't take care of sensory loss, doesn't take care of the fact that I feel lonely, doesn't take care of the fact that I don't want to go out because maybe I had a stroke, I can't really speak very well, I drool when I eat my food because that's an outcome of my stroke, I feel socially embarrassed. So financial resources in and of themselves are not a protection against some of these things. And that's an important assumption for us to kind of bring into our consciousness and say, just because someone has financial resources doesn't mean they're not struggling. And as you said, in Marin County, if you have 44% of your households are single adults, older adults, that's an important statistic to pay attention to. Grief and loss, we all know, I'm sure we've all experienced grief and loss, right? Most of us want to just go into our cave and it's very hard to reach out, to connect. We have lots of support groups, so one of the questions is, how do we help people connect with the resources, the emotional resources that they might need, and not allow them to become socially isolated because of that? Physical disabilities, which is tied to one of the things I'll talk about in terms of dealing with this, is transportation options. If I'm in a wheelchair, what are my options for getting to activities? If I'm dealing with chronic pain because of disabilities or any kind of physical condition, what kinds of resources are there to help me with that so that I feel like I have access to the things that I think might help me? Cognitive changes. There was a fascinating study that I just learned about this summer at the International Association on Gerontology and Geriatrics in San Francisco, done by a woman named Porta Coteleone, I think. I'll have to think about that, in San Francisco. But she interviewed older people who were beginning to deal with cognitive changes and early stages of dementia. And some of these people, highly accomplished. I'll never forget, she said, this one man who had been a college professor, and he said, I go to the gym in my neighborhood because I know it's important for me to get physical exercise, but I can't talk to people because then they're going to know that something's wrong with me. So I go to the gym and then I just go home. And how heartbreaking for him. He's saying, these young men are trying to talk to me, and I can't engage because I'm too embarrassed. And then I feel socially isolated, right? This other woman said, I keep notebooks. I don't want to tell anybody. I don't want my family to know how bad I am. And then I have notebooks and notebooks of reminders and which notebook did I write last time and what's the most recent note that I wrote myself. So she's feeling very isolated and in this kind of spin cycle in her own functioning of just trying to get through the day. So those are things that we also need to really think about and pay attention to in our own families as well as in our communities and with our neighbors. And I'll talk about neighbors in a few minutes. Sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression can lead to social isolation and a sense of loneliness because of the social judgments that other people have. Where are their places? Are the senior centers indicating that we're open and welcoming and inclusive of everybody? Do we have programming that addresses the interests and needs of a diverse group of people from a diverse set of backgrounds and a diverse set of identities? Do we have rainbows? Do we have triangles? What are the signs and symbols that people can see? This is a sign that there's a welcoming environment here. Physical and geographical location, urban and rural, have different issues, but again, in Marin County, you have a wide variety of neighborhoods. In some areas, there's no sidewalks, right? People are isolated in their homes. They can't go out and visit their neighbors. You're not going to run into people walking on the street because your home is up a long driveway or in the woods or a whole variety. And then you have very walkable neighborhoods here. So again, at the county level, there's a lot of challenges in that way in Marin County to think about what's our geography and the physical environment that facilitates or hinders the ability to help people connect in a more natural, on a daily basis kind of opportunity. Loss of spouse or partner is another issue where people, lots of research shows when someone loses a partner, they stop getting invited out, they're the third wheel, we don't quite know what to say, it's been a couple years, why aren't you over it yet? It's kind of awkward for you to keep talking about your loss. So we as a society don't deal with loss and grief very well. And that also leads us to kind of shy away from people who are dealing with that because we don't really know how to deal with that. Caregiver overwhelm. Again, lots of research on caregiving and who has any time and energy to go out and socialize, right? So the question is, how do we support caregivers and go to them to provide the connection and support they need? And sometimes that's online, sometimes that's by telephone, sometimes that's in person, sometimes that's food, flowers, going on a walk with someone with the person there taking care of. So we have to really think out of the box, and oftentimes, for me, one of the questions I've learned to ask over my career is, okay, where is the person I want to support? What do I need to do to get there, where they are? Rather than saying, what are you going to do to get to where I am? I'm offering you all this support, why aren't you here? I think we ask the wrong question. The question needs to be, what do we need to do to get over there, right? Lack or loss of social support from loss of friends, moving, really key, inability to attend religious or worship services. That's something that can be dealt with at a neighborhood level, a place of worship level in terms of volunteer drivers. Yep. Oh, yeah, sorry, I skipped that one. So cultural isolation, we hear about it all the time in the public news of people who are feeling like I can't be myself, I can't express my culture, We also have a reaction to someone with an accent. I can't really understand you. What were you saying? And so again, we tend to shy away because we're not trained very well in our society about how to deal with diversity. And so how do we overcome our own hesitation with that? But again, it goes back to programming, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So strategies to promote social connections, physical activity, always good. It's good for a whole variety of things, physical and emotional and psychic. So going on walks with people, going over and sitting with someone so someone can go to a yoga class, a meditation class, whatever. Outreach, again, I'll talk on the next slide about at different levels, neighborhood, community, and the county level. Sharing of information of interest to the person, getting to know somebody. What are you interested in? Sending little tidbits by email or by text. Hey, did you read this article? So that someone feels like, oh, Jody knows what I'm interested in, right? And even if the connection is just by text, it makes a huge difference if people can text. We all got to take into that account too. Volunteering, helping people get outside of themselves sometimes works for some people, not everybody, but saying, hey, here's a place where we could really use your talents, your experience, your connection. Down here, intergenerational programs and how much older people can feel appreciated by sharing their life experience with younger people. In the East Bay, we've set up lots of programs like connecting older people with history students in high school classes, telling life stories, students who are helping older people put together photo albums and things for their family that they're not motivated on their own, but if they have a young person who's enthusiastically saying, oh, I'll come over for an hour a week and help you put this together. Phone volunteers and friendly visitors. Peer groups by interest. Again, those can be online, by phone, at a meeting place. Really thinking creatively about the use of technology and how we can use that to connect people. Different cultural activities, again, in different events that you have, how culturally broad are they and culturally diverse and culturally inclusive. Inviting someone to come and share a recipe they have, their religious practices or cultural practices, different celebrations, music, dance, all of those things that help people feel recognized in themselves. It's important. Helping them find meaningful roles in their housing unit or in their community or in their place of worship. Reminiscence and life review groups. This is a place that we did in this low-income senior housing where we connected people with very diverse backgrounds. And they found out, oh, we had that in common. Oh, we had that in common. Because we all have our first day of school. We all have our first date. What was that like? For many people talking about their World War II experience, whatever that diverse experience was, right? That was a cohort experience they could share. So in terms of neighbors, sharing news, what's going on in the neighborhood or in the town, checking in on someone, inviting someone to participate in chatting or walking or maybe working in their garden or working in your garden. For service providers, finding language services if someone needs it, finding support groups, places of worship. Again, I can't underestimate how important that is for people. Finding places to share cultural activities, right? So these are resources that service providers should really be learning about in their community and helping start if someone needs that. Doing accurate assessments about what's going on. So back to, is it depression? Is it loneliness? Is it social isolation? Connection with health services, whether physical or mental, and advocating for services for people. And then at the community level, transportation services, sharing community news in a variety of venues in a variety of ways, and helping people figure out how to connect what works best for them. Do they want a newsletter mailed to their house? Do they want it to come electronically? Public television. And then diversifying senior center activities to be more inclusive. And I'll just talk quickly about some international, I work with a group of international researchers from a variety of countries. So in my colleague Cecilia Henning in Sweden is just talking about this concept of thin ties. So in Sweden, people are very private, and they kind of connect with their families, but not people much outside of that. But at these senior centers, what they're finding is that people who come for meals, what they're reporting is, even though I used to feel socially isolated, I don't feel emotionally intimate, but I feel connected, this thin tie of now when I go to the store and I see Jody, oh, hi. Oh, yeah, you were at lunch yesterday. I'm not going to share anything more intimate than that, but it makes me feel like, oh, she knows me and I know her. I'm not entirely alone in my house anymore, right? So this concept of thin ties, we don't have to be best friends, but this sense of connection, someone knows me and recognizes me, is really important. In Japan, my colleague Toki Anmei's research follows people over time, and she looks at the changing forms of social integration. So as people have become more frail, what are the ways that they report feeling connected? So having a neighbor stop by and say, oh, did you know, I went to the fair, community fair. I couldn't go, but Jody could go, and Jody can tell me. So now I know at least a little bit more of what was going on. Watching television, having local news being broadcast that I can feel connected to, listening to the radio, and knowing there's a channel for me to listen to because I can't get out of my house. So it was interesting in Japan for the very old 95 plus year olds to say, oh, if I didn't have my radio, if I didn't have my neighbor stop by and tell me what happened, I'd feel really isolated. And in Israel, they've done a really good job of creating neighborhood peer support programs. So it's kind of like a friendly visitor, but it's an ongoing relationship that they build. And then you all know about aging-friendly cities because you were just having your meeting about them. So these are kind of the domains, right? So we can think about how are we as a city or a community or a county working in these different domains. I think that's it. That's it. Okay. So thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I have a million questions and comments, but we're going to move, we're going to go through all of our speakers, and then we're going to save 15 minutes here at the end for Q&A. I forgot to say that in the beginning. So, Rachel, let me ask you to come on up. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. I don't know if I really need this. Okay. Thank you, Mary. Touch and overlap a little. It's great. Little repeating here and there. So we have a program in the county. It's a HOPE and Senior Peer Counseling program, and I'm not going to talk about the HOPE program. We can have questions about that later if we need to. But the Senior Peer Counseling program is a mental health service in the county. We have about 40 counselors and about 50 clients. It is free, no fee for services, and it's run by volunteers. We get referrals from many agencies in the county, sometimes from family members and sometimes from the clients themselves. People are referred because they're isolated, they're anxious, they're depressed, they're lonely, and they're coping with the multiple issues that they have to face with aging. Issues such as sensory loss, hard of hearing, macular degeneration, clients are blind, they are dealing with a chronic illness or maybe a new diagnosis. financial concerns, maybe they've been uprooted, moved here from another state to be with their adult child. They've had to lose their whole community and their whole life from where they were, and they come here and they're living with an adult child who is a young mother and works, and they're in the back room of the house, and they're not noticed at all, really. I mean, we've had clients like that. So our program really supports older adults, 60 and older, to get emotional support and to get social engagement, to get seen, to get received, to have somebody who cares, who shows up for them on a consistent basis. We go to people's homes, we go to retirement centers, sometimes assisted living, once in a while a SNF, but not too often. So various places, and our counselors are trained. They come from all walks of life, and they want to give back. They've been retired, and they want to still continue to engage themselves. So it's great. They get to engage, and the client gets to engage. The senior peer counselor gives a service that's even beyond social engagement. They are, for some people it's like a lifeline. They don't have anyone in their life who will, like I said before, consistently connect, but they also foster this person's independence and help them to get to know themselves in a way that if they were home alone, isolated, they wouldn't have that. They wouldn't have that at all. So it's a very rich program, and I just feel like it really helps support so many people. We also have, I just want to mention, I forgot to mention, that we have groups that these counselors can go to, and they're supervision groups. I shouldn't say that they can go to, they need to go to. We have one in San Rafael, one in West Marin, one in Novato, and we also have a Spanish-speaking program as well. So there's 3 of us as supervisor, and our supervisor, Jane Ireland, who is here today, she is the head of the whole program, as well as the whole program as well. So what else can I tell you? I just want to just say that we have one of our peer counselors here today who is going to share his experience of what it's like to be a peer counselor. So very happy to introduce Bruce Murphy. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you. One result of my aging is I don't trust my memory anymore, so I've got a cheat sheet here. I'm Bruce Murphy, and I'm senior peer counselor, volunteer senior peer counselor, and I'm 81. My client is much younger. She's a professional person who loved her job and career. And then some 20 plus years ago, she required multiple surgeries and had a violent reaction to a prescribed medication that rendered her totally incapacitated and disabled. She could no longer work, just getting barely by with the help of a walker and a wheelchair. Emotionally, she was devastated. She's isolated in the sense that she's totally dependent on others for her well-being and for their taking initiative for her to have human contact. She has caregivers that can shop for her and drive her places, but she's very limited as to where she can go because the access to any building has to be just so for her to get in and out. Even many places that are listed as accessible are not so for her. She loved the outdoors, and hiking was her passion, and that joy is no longer available to her. I see her once a week for an hour. My role with her is to be an objective listener, to be an outlet for her. She has some close friends, but most of their limited contact is by phone, or for them to take the initiative to come see her or meet her at some place that she can access, and that takes some doing. And when she does have contact or interaction with friends, she doesn't want to use that precious time to burden them with her struggles and frustrations and challenges and any negative or depressive emotions she might have. She's fearful that to do this very often would push them away, and I think that's realistic. So that's where I come in. That's what I provide. I'm someone with whom she can let it all hang out. Someone who will listen and hear her out and accept and acknowledge all her feelings and emotions without judgment. Listen to her frustrations and anxieties and fears and deepest and darkest feelings and not counter them or try to smooth them over or try to fix things for her. Just be a sounding board for her to process all that she has to deal with day in and day out. And she's very appreciative of my time and presence. And I like to think that I'm making a small positive difference in her valiant efforts and perseverance to just keep going day after day and keep living as much as is possible for her. And it's a two-way street. I retired at age 76 after a long career in human service work. And for the first years of my retirement, I didn't want any obligations or commitments outside of friends and families. I just wanted to travel whenever and wherever I chose and spend more time with my kids and their families. But after a couple of years, I knew there was something missing in my life. There was a void. I still wanted to be in service. And I heard about the program, the Senior Peer Counseling Program, and I got involved, and it really felt right. To a degree, I was back in the saddle again. Having a purpose outside of my personal life and a way to use my skills and experience to once again give back to the community. And so my later years are now more full and fulfilling because of it. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much. That brought back some of the memories I had when I was a senior peer counselor too. Really sweet, thank you. Okay, so now we have about 15 minutes for questions and answers for any of our three speakers. So who's got a question? So Amy's going to come with the, if you'd mention who it's for, then we'll, yeah.
Rachel,
yeah, that's
do you
probably a
mind
good
coming
idea.
back up here? Just you guys, just in case somebody has a question.
Yeah, would you both mind coming up and just in case, and
Please.
then that way we'll all
you.
be close. There we go. So Amy will bring you the microphone and I'll call on people.
Okay. Thank you both for the wonderful work you're doing. It's heartwarming to hear that there are people on the front lines making good things happen. My concern is how many people have needs and how many people are actually around to be able to meet them. Is that clear? If there's 44,000 people, alone, and there's, I don't know how many in each category that are helping these people, how many more do you need to be able to be of service to the bigger community? Does that make sense?
That might be a good question for all three of you, actually, or two, certainly two or three.
It's a great question. Thank you. Yeah. If we could get more counselors, we need referrals, and that's the one thing I forgot to mention, that we would love to get referrals from all of you. If you know somebody who's home alone, isolated, depressed, coping with issues of aging, needs support, we're here. We just need the referrals, and we'll work on what we can to get them their counselor.
How would I make a referral?
I have cards in my pocket, and you can come and talk to me in the back of the room later if you have somebody that you think would be appropriate. It has to be somebody who's 60 and older, and we could talk about the criteria a little bit more. Yeah.
I would say that in my experience, if you have 44,000 people who are experiencing social isolation or loneliness, that many of those are people who could be senior volunteers, right? That they are the ones who could go and participate in high school activities with students. They could participate in other programs, for example, surrogate grandparents, visiting grandparents for kids who have single parents, participating in reading programs at schools, right? So if you think about not just the demographic of everybody in that group is needy, but many of those people have something to offer, they just don't know how, right? So where are the schools, where are the daycare centers, where are the community activities where we can connect those people to give and feel fulfilled, right? So not everybody who's lonely is the only person who needs support. They may be the one who needs to give something.
If we know of someone who might be a candidate for counseling but lives in another county, like San Francisco, how would we find out what's available there for counseling?
If you don't have a direct answer, I would recommend for all of these things calling 457-INFO. That's 457-4636. And our trained social workers who answer the phone can generally refer people to the correct phone number. Also, in terms of senior peer counseling, they can, that's our catch-all number, and they'll be able to hook you up with the appropriate phone numbers and the appropriate departments as well. We have a lot of bookmarks over here with that phone number, but once again, it's 457-INFO, 457-4636. Thanks.
There's also a website on Northern California Senior Peer Counseling. You can go online and look up a website, Northern California Senior Peer Counseling. You can look that up online. We could talk more about that if you want to.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for all the information. I found it most useful. My question is, one of my needs, where I live alone at home and feel somewhat isolated, is finding suitable people for providing services like yard work and cleaning is the two major ones. I've got a fairly large yard, and I used to enjoy maintaining it, but I can't keep up with it, and can't keep up with the cleaning and the dishes either. So any idea of where to turn to get somebody to assist in that way, and at the same time be a companion, and maybe just make me motivated to do a little bit more.
Well, besides that phone number, so I definitely think of it because it can link you to a couple. Certainly the Marin villages and Sausalito villages, etc., is another good connection for you, and they can tell you about that at that phone number. A number of us are also connected with the villages and would be happy to chat with you about that as well.
Oh, yeah, also, well, next door, if you are, Well, there, okay. A new program at Marin Villages is called Chores, and so you could check that out, and your local Rotary Club. A lot of the Rotary Clubs have some sort of program to help in the area. You talked a little bit, thank you, about the international perspectives, and I'm just interested with our other two speakers. I imagine you travel and somewhat aware about what's happening in other countries or have seen and experienced it. I'd be interested to hear if you have any insights about what you've seen in other countries that we could be thinking about doing here that shed light on our culture and opportunities.
So that was good information for you.
Part of it is the cultural value. So Japan is a very communalistic, Israel is a very communalistic culture. We're not. And so some of the things, Tai Chi in the park, community exercising programs where neighbors bring neighbors, because it's kind of, that's the underlying cultural value, is we do these things together. My colleague in Japan tried to introduce the concept of empowerment and an individual workout plan, and it took them about 10 years for the older Japanese people to meet, what do you mean individual? No, I work out with my peers and my community group, my neighbor group. So they had a different issue of trying to say, but you have a different health issue than you do, so maybe there's something slightly different that needs to be done.
I wanted to mention about that too. I think finding your like group, the group that you feel really comfortable with, is a challenge for people. Probably many of you are aware of seniors, older folks who say, I don't want to go to that luncheon, it's a bunch of old people. If they're younger old as opposed to old or older old. So that can be a challenge for people, and I think you just want to keep looking, because there are pockets of folks when you want to be with like-minded people that you can find. That's great.
I think we also need to really help facilitate people being more open-minded and going to things that they wouldn't normally go to. And this is where neighbors and friends and family can be really important. I'm going to this play, I'm going to this dance, I'm going to this cultural event. Please come with me. I'm feeling lonely, Mom. Can you keep me company when I go to this? Right? To help people see there's ways to connect and have great experiences, and you don't have to be best friends as the outcome of that. But it is to get out and feel like there's life going on around me that I can participate in. And we can encourage people to get out of their comfort zone a little bit.
And to look at those issues about internalized ageism. And the thin ties, I just want to mention, I think that's such an important issue. Just to say hi to various people can make their day if they haven't had that much contact. Across the street, if it's your neighbor, even if you don't have time to go chat, but you see them and they see you, they're going out to get their mail, and you really make an effort to say, hi, it's great to see you, I'm glad you look like you're doing okay. Yeah.
And just right here in our neck of the woods, and not in other countries, like you're saying, but there's also Whistlestop and Margaret Todd. These are wonderful places for older adults to engage with other older adults. They have lots of activities, and you can support them in going to these places. They're wonderful. Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify Jody's data. Was it 44% of
44,000, right.
are seniors living alone or people living alone?
44,000 households, of older people in Marin, 44,000 households, and 44% of those households are single.
Seniors living alone.
Single, yes, older adults.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Yeah. So it's not that many that, yeah. Jim has a question? Luetta?
Oops.
I'm curious to know whether you have more than one client, or do you find that one client is as much as you can deal with?
Quite a few of our volunteers have more than one.
No, but you.
I've had more than one, yeah.
Because I'm sure that it's somewhat draining, somewhat exhausting, even though you want to do it and you're doing what you want to do. That's why I was curious if you could handle.
Yeah, it depends on the other commitments that counselors have, but I think 2 is my limit.
Well, I think it's a very important thing that you're doing, a service that you're doing. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and not so much. I don't find it so much draining. It takes some real focus, but I often come out feeling uplifted.
Good. Thank you very much.
Pardon? Bruce. Bruce.
Bruce.
Bruce, yeah.
Thank you.
I just wanted to reiterate and agree with you that when I had a client that I would go to see, sometimes I would think, oh, I got such a busy day, I got this hour, I'm going to go. And I always came away feeling like it was such a wonderful exchange, that it was so worth my time and my effort. So I wasn't even sure she got as much out of it as I did when I would leave, because it's very good work. It's very heartfelt work, and it's really nurturing right back to you. Wait, we got one person, and then, yeah, then you're.
2 observations. One is I'm required to go to the gym 3 days a week. And there's quite a substantial number of people there who are seniors. And several of them have said, I really don't come here to work out. I come here to chat. And it's a very, very vivid group of people from all walks of life. So that's another connection. One other thing is I wondered if you've been looking at the effects of globalization on different cultures and the way that they deal with aging. About 15 years ago, my firm, which had done a lot of senior housing in this country, were asked to come to Japan because there was a trend that was accelerating, that the old tradition that when you were old you went to live with your family was really disappearing. And so they had a real need for senior housing, and we must have designed 500 or 600 units over there. But my favorite Japanese, you were talking about individualism, my favorite Japanese phrase that my Japanese architect cohort gave me, he said, we don't do individualism. We say the nail that protrudes requests to be beaten.
Well, just one comment on what's happening in Sweden right now, which has had a very generous welfare policy, and basically an older person could just call up and say, I need home care, I need this, I need that. Well, because of their aging population, global economic influences, and now the fact that Sweden in the last 2 years has taken over 1 million refugees from a 9 million population. So they've taken, imagine if we took in 1/9 of the US population of refugees. So their home health program is shrinking, 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 shrinking. And older people are getting very nervous about, am I going to be able to stay in my home? What is that going to look like? Families are getting nervous because the government is starting to say families are going to have to step up more, and they are not used to doing that. Whereas in Japan, families have stepped out and the government has said, okay, how are we going to step in?
Actually, we do need to stop. So if you could ask ask him privately after, that would be great. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming, for our wonderful speakers and our great questions.